Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. My name is Alice Rueza, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our side event on the business case for energy access in Africa. As you know, you've all heard the numbers. Over 640 million Africans have no access to energy, corresponding to an electricity rate for African countries at just over 40%. And of course, access to energy is crucial not only for the attainment of health and education outcomes, but also for reducing the cost of doing business and unlocking economic potential and creating jobs. But Africa's energy potential is enormous, especially in renewable energy, yet only a fraction of it is currently employed. So this event will bring a new perspective to energy access challenges in Africa by presenting them as business opportunities. In this event, we will highlight how accelerating access to clean and affordable renewable energy alternatives is a better option for divesting from fossil fuels. In a nutshell, this event will highlight the need to A, prevent further fossil fuel extraction, B, divest from fossil fuels to renewable energy, C, increase energy access to millions in Africa, and D, ensure a just energy transition and engage the private sector in the ongoing renewable energy transition efforts in Africa. By generating support from participants for our position, in this event, we will motivate the private sector to increase investments in affordable renewable energy solutions and in parallel, encourage the public sector to identify and create enabling environments for fast-tracking a sustainable transition to renewables for energy access. We will also highlight possible energy-related solutions that can conserve nature, biodiversity, and in parallel, reduce carbon emissions. I will now hand over to my colleague Thomas Opande to introduce our impressive panel today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. In our panel, we have 4 speakers. I will do the introduction. I start by Ruchi Soni. Ruchi Soni is a program manager for Universal Energy Facility, results-based financing with C4All. Ruchi, welcome. Number 2 is Jean Duarte Cunha, who works for Africa Development Bank. He's the head of division for renewable energy based in Ivory Coast. We have Mr. Paul Mbuthi, who is seated on my left here. He's a deputy director of renewable energy, Ministry of Energy in Kenya. And online together with us also is Mrs. Habiba Ali. Habiba Ali is the CEO for Society Renewable Energies Company in Nigeria, which is a very successful renewable energy company and one of the leading small, medium enterprises in the renewable energy sector in Africa. I will do this by starting a few questions. So the questions will be presented to the speakers, and as they answer them, we will be able to get the flow of the renewable energy sector in Africa. The panel is widely made up of the private sector, finance, and of course the government. So we will be able to look at how the government of Kenya and particularly have done very well in the renewable energy field. Mrs. Habiba Ali will talk to us a little about how the small-scale industry is important in the transformation of renewable energy. Mr. Jean will talk about how big finance can be able to transform renewable energy sector in the whole continent, and the same will also be with Ruchi Soni. For the 4 speakers, you're all welcome. I'll start with my questions to Mrs. Ruchi Soni. Please, Mrs. Ruchi Soni, what approaches does C4All apply in order to accelerate access to renewable energy finance in the continent?
Thank you, Thomas, and pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and depending on where you are. So as Thomas mentioned, my name is Ruchi Soni, and I'm the program manager at Sustainable Energy for All. I lead our work on results-based financing that houses a facility by the name of Universal Energy Facility. While I'm clearly not being able to join you today in person, I see my esteemed panelists and Paul will more than make up for my video presence. So thanks, Thomas, for the question. I'll start by saying that with only 10 years and less than 10 years now left to achieve SDG 7 goal, Governments need to know where to focus. The funders in turn need to know what solutions to support. And solution providers and private sector in turn also need to understand what communities to target. So there are a couple of tactics that we at SE for All have employed, and I'll give you a brief flavor of at least 3 of them that directly support this access to finance. So starting with the first one, which is where we've been working on integrated energy planning to help direct resources both effectively and efficiently to where they're needed the most. To break it down, we at SE for All are trying to make use of the data and the digital tools to help policymakers identify the right mix of technologies to achieve this access. Our ultimate goal here is to accelerate this adoption of best-in-class, comparable, integrated energy plans. Just to give a quick example, and Habiba would like this, is our SE for All's current support in developing an IEP for the government of Nigeria around electrification, clean cooking, and medical cold chain for vaccine rollout. So very topical issue, as you can see. Our second intervention is based off the work that the World Bank has done around the regulatory indicators for sustainable energy. So the RISE research from the World Bank shows that we're only about halfway towards adopting this advanced policy and regulatory framework in the sector. This is definitely not new to my panelists and to this audience, but strong policy and regulatory frameworks are known to de-risk and unlock finance. So again, our support here will be to accelerate this adoption of best-in-class policy and regulatory frameworks across the continent. Finally, pivoting to our work on financing directly and the work that I lead. So we at SE for All house the Universal Energy Facility, which is a RBF facility, results-based financing facility, which is catalyzing finance in 3 countries of Sierra Leone, Madagascar, and Benin by providing results-based finance for mini grids. I'll pause here, and while these are just a few of these areas of support that we offer, I highly, highly encourage you to meet one of my colleagues at the SDG 7 Pavilion or write to me for more details. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, Ruchi. My next talking point goes to Jean. Jean, what is the role of multilateral and regional banks in bridging the energy access gap?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you can hear me well, and I'm coming clean. I think I had some issues with my computer, but I think it's all in the past now. So yes, that's a good. I think that's the billion-dollar, the multi-billion-dollar question. So closing the energy access gap, it's possible, is within reach. We know that there are technologies that are proven. We know that there are business models that have been out there and expanding. But before we close that gap, we need to close another gap, which is the financing gap. I think we all know, and it's been documented in various studies, that we need tens of billions of dollars every year to finance the energy access sector and really, deliver universal access by 2030. And we know that regional and multilateral development banks like the African Development Bank, even with all its financial might, but we can really only cover a small part of it. We do, $2 to $3 billion in the energy sector a year, in a good year, right? And that's only a drop in the bucket, and that's covering, not just energy access, but infrastructure in energy more generally. So the role of private sector financing is absolutely critical. We need to mobilize more private capital, more private investors. And this is really where we are focusing our efforts. So we need to get this capital flowing, we really need to compensate, and we need to really adjust the risks and enhance the returns and really make sure that energy access business models are projects that are worthwhile, the investments for private investors. Our role is twofold. One is market building, or more upstream. This is really about, de-risking and creating the enabling environment. And Ruchi, I think, alluded already to that. The need for adequate policy frameworks, regulations, fiscal incentives, subsidy frameworks, quality assurance standards. These all come into play when we want to bring in the private sector to electrify remote communities. And African Development Bank, through its relationships with African governments and through its sort of, I would say, honest broker role as a development finance institution, we are able and willing to engage with our member countries, with our clients, and really advocate and really advise on how best to create this enabling environment for the private sector. But it's not just about advising, it's about also supporting, and we avail various technical assistance finance instruments, grants, and hands-on support to really work with our member countries in walking down that path of creating that sort of framework for private capital to come in. And last but not least, we also work on developing the appropriate financing instruments for the energy access sector, understanding that the financing supply available is not entirely adequate. And I think Ruchi was talking about the results-based financing. That's one of the catalytic instruments for the mini-grid space, and we're working on that. We're working on guarantees, concessional debt for blending. So these are various types of interventions that we're supporting. And then obviously, downstream comes the financing. I think once the conditions are there, once the projects are there, and we are willing and able to bring in the financing, and we avail a broad suite of debt, equity, and guarantees. We work closely with African financial institutions, and we try to bring them along. So try to play that catalytic role. And last but not least, as an accredited agency and very experienced financier, we are able to mobilize climate finance at scale from the global facilities for blending with our own instruments, but we also have our own Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, which is currently growing as one of the main blending platforms and concessional finance platforms for the African continent. I'll stop it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean. The next talking point will be by Mr. Paul Mbuthi. Mr. Paul, please tell us from what do you think African governments can do based on the Kenyan government experience? What can they do differently to be able to accelerate energy access to affordable renewable energy?
Thank you, Thomas. And yes, my name is Paul Mbuthi, working for Ministry of Energy, Kenya. On this very important question of what can African governments do differently to accelerate access to affordable renewable energy? I think the first thing is to, first of all, recognize that Africa has vast renewable energy resources. And these resources need to be used as strategic resources. We have huge geothermal resource. We have huge hydro resources. If you think of the Congo Basin and how much we can be able to harness from there, these are big things. We have energy minerals in several countries, and these minerals are being mined and exported. Africa needs to use these resources as strategic, in the sense that they provide competitive advantage. Second point is we must put the people at the center of these interventions. That means if you are going to talk about accelerating access, then we need to understand this, how are they being applied by the different consumers. And by this I mean, you know, we're talking about affordability. Affordability is not the only factor, because you could have a resource which is affordable, but is it available? Is it safe? Is it convenient? Is it efficient? And how about exposure to emissions? These are the factors that we need to look at, and therefore we need to do it differently. Because we've been doing it top-down, we need to create a bottom-up approach where we understand the user needs. And in this sense, I'm trying to say we need to focus on frameworks like using the least cost, best fit interventions. You look at a community, you assess what is least cost and what is best fit for that specific circumstance. Because in this sense, you may find that you need to understand the user needs. What are they using energy for? And therefore you tailor your interventions to their very specific needs. You also need to look at the contextual reality of the place that you're dealing with. Because you may find that the context in terms of the market conditions, in terms of the maturity of the markets, you need to understand this so that the planning is completely analyzing what is available, what is applicable in that sense. And so I am saying we need to change the paradigm of how we have approached this service delivery. And the other point that I need also to put is that in our planning, you see, the traditional energy system planning has not been taking into account the participation of the stakeholders. We've not been doing that. We need now to embrace participation as a key factor that should help us be able to identify and get the voices of those that we are targeting, so that at the end of it, they own it, they buy it, and therefore there is a chance for sustainability. So in this way, then Africa can change the paradigm, because this paradigm has not worked for the many years that we've been promoting and trying to scale up services. And of course, if I just add one more point, how do we engage the private sector into this space? This is another area, because governments are supposed to be facilitators, but the private sector delivers the service. How do we ensure policies are supportive? They are providing an enabling environment for investment and can leverage the private capital which is available. And so in this very way, we need to look at it from that systems approach, because we've been dealing with things like they are just a single commodity. But now, that paradigm needs to shift. We think systems so that you are looking at the value chain. You're looking at who is there. What are the environments that you need to provide? How do you continue to scale demand? Because we have seen cases where energy and electricity supply, for instance, is likely to be more than the demand. How do you stimulate demand? You need to create innovative ways in which demand can be created. You need to look at productive uses. You need to look at the entire cycle. So in my assessment, then it means we must change our paradigm in planning, in approach, and in participation, including the private sector. Let me hold it there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul. Your insights on the modern way of planning and the paradigm shift by the public sector in the renewable energy sector is so stimulating and so important. It's now time for Mrs. Habiba also to tell us a little bit of the insights and the untapped market opportunities within the renewable energy sector in Africa. Mrs. Habiba, what do you see as the main untapped market opportunities in the renewable energy sector in Africa?
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here, and I mean, looking at it from the private sector point of view, where I've been for the past 15 years, there's so much that we can do when it comes to renewable energies and how we can actually prefer it to people in especially developing countries and Africa as a whole. There's been a lot that has happened in the past 2 years almost 2 years, that has actually changed our paradigm and made us feel like, there's some other thing that's more important than the crisis of the climate and how the value that renewable energy can actually bring to reduction of climate crisis, right? COVID-19, as much as it has changed and helped us, caused us to look at things in a new light and causing increase in the case of solar PV costs because of the high that's currently going on from China and every other place manufacturing overcapacities expected to reach record levels in the coming years. But the truth be told is that as much as we have all of these challenges coming, we also need to refocus and realize that there's a huge role that renewable electricity, renewable energy for, cooking and all of the household activities that we're currently doing and business can actually add to. There's a lot of value it can add, and there's a lot of opportunities as well. Of course, when you find value that renewable anything can bring to livelihoods, then you can understand that that's huge opportunities. Currently, there's one of the things that we've been
Hello, sorry for the unfortunate disappearance by internet by Habiba. Are you back?
I'm here. Did you lose me? Hello? Did you lose me? Can you hear me? I hear you. I see you move.
Yes, I can hear you. Continue.
Okay, great. Sorry, I didn't know you lost me for a bit. Okay, so there's a lot of, for example, I was talking about the rural communities in Nigeria where the grid doesn't get to all of the communities, and the few communities that the grid does get to, the value of renewable energy the value of energy is not really felt by the people because they do not know how to manage this. Our industries are suffering because there's not enough energy to manufacture, to do their work and all of that. And so my opinion, and this is like a huge opportunity for the renewable energy sector, is what can we do to emphasize more that can happen in the distributed renewable energy space, because we really do not need to transport all of this energy from the grid all the way to these like very distant communities and very remote communities. The easiest thing to do will be to bring energy closest to them so that they can actually have it to do the little small businesses that they are doing, have energy for lighting, have energy for cooking, and just generally live a fulfilled life. Then all the energy that's the little one that's coming from the grid, for example, in Nigeria, 4,000 megawatts, can actually go to the industries and major sectors that can actually create economic value for the nation. And in the long run, the people in the communities do not really suffer, because currently when you pass through a village in rural Nigeria, for example, and how you want to know if they do have electricity is you see a 60-watt bulb blaring light during the day. And so this is something that they do not understand the value. 60 watts is enough for a solar solution, can actually give you a television, a DC television, a DC fan, 4 points of lighting with just the same 60 watts. So we can actually do that kind of replacements and ensure that we promote renewable energy, solar energy to communities for household activities. Also for businesses. And this is also why I always look at energy, like energy can be the solution to us achieving a lot of our SDGs and all of that. Because when you think about the women in rural Nigeria where they do not have access to business, access to carry out economic activities, what renewable energy can actually bring to them is, for example, there's something we're currently doing at Say we're creating solar drying hubs in some communities. We've been able to do about 7 now, and we have rural women own the hubs. They pay say back on a leasehold basis, but they own the hubs and they can dry farm produce. These hubs are set up in communities where post-harvest loss is a big deal. So they dry tomatoes, peppers, and stuff, and then they can package it and sell it, or they can actually do drying services. So that way they are also making some sort of income for themselves. And we're also trying to help women to also own solar refrigeration kiosks and all of that. So you can see that. But the major crux of the matter is, how do they access these technologies? And that will be something that we will have to talk about again in another opportunity. But then there are also several other opportunities that as I sit here and I'm thinking about. We have, I work with another organization where one of the major problems one of our communities has is overflooding by the dam that's actually generating energy for the nation as a whole, the Kainji Dam. And the people at the downstream always complain that they normally would have been fishing, they normally would have had a lot of out of season farming, but they can't do that now as efficiently as they used to. And I'm thinking, what role can renewable energy play in this space in ensuring that extractive industries can actually continue? So that's also another opportunity that I'm already seeing there, So like I said, whenever you want to add value to something, and then there's just nothing else but an opportunity that's being born out of that.
Thank you so much, Habiba. I see your talk is much more about opportunities which can be there and challenges which are being there. But all this, we also know that renewable energy is a very expensive capital investment, especially in the initial stages. It pays off after some time. And Ruchi, can you please tell us what you think needs to be done more so that we can increase financially, so that we can increase renewable energy finance?
Thank you, Thomas, again. So this is really a billion-dollar question, and I'll tell you why, and I'll sort of set the context with some of the work that SE for All's done to unpack this. So according to SE for All's latest research, 2021 Energizing Finance research, finance committed to residential electricity access in the top 20 countries with the biggest energy access deficit has fallen from $16 billion US dollars in 2018 to 12.9 in 2019. It's everyone's guess that this would have fallen even further in the last year or so. And again, I think the more promising part here is that we're seeing a lot of commitments in the last few days in Glasgow. But the key question here for us remains on how is this being delivered? So another sobering number from our research shows that the tracked investment in off-grid solutions, mini-grid technologies, also declined from 460 million US dollars to close to 300, a little less than 300 million. So again, this sort of sets the context that this remains an issue throughout the sector. And I promise this is the last number I have, and Zhao may not like that, but bilateral and multilateral DFI finance also dropped dramatically between 2018 to 2019. So this to us sort of serves as a major problem because DFI finance, as all of us know, is critical to crowding in private sector investment. While I can go on and on about this data, I state these numbers for a reason that it basically sets the landscape for all of us on the panel and in the audience can do more in this space. So I'm going to sort of limit myself to a couple of points, but to stress what Zhao in fact mentioned earlier, conducive policy framework and best-in-class regulations help unlock this investment. So goes back to what Paul was mentioning, that you see countries like Kenya who are doing really well, and that you can pretty much point towards certain policies that are attracting this investment. Again, as we heard earlier, there are a lot of different financing instruments. I'm not going to repeat this, but just in terms of opportunities, I think we're seeing some very promising commitments. But if I can actually go a step further and make this a call for action to say, we need to address this persistent underinvestment in this finance for electricity access. And this is directly for public actors, including national governments, donors, philanthropies, DFIs. And I think we all sort of need to raise, join hands and collectively increase our own funding, but at the same time, mobilize this commercial capital in the space. I'll pause here, but happy to take any questions later. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, Ruchi. As much as we talk about access to renewable energy finance, especially at the mini and microgrid level, it's also good to talk about finance, especially at the multilateral level. And Zhao, what is your opinion on this? How can multilateral banks like your bank cascade their funding for both on and off grid to reach the millions without energy access? We need funding at a higher level, so maybe you can give us insights how we can cascade that.
Sure. So In order to answer that question, I need to provide a little bit of background on our business model. And as a multilateral, as a large financier, our expertise historically has been more on the large infrastructure projects, the big sort of investments that require a lot of capital, a lot of investor mobilization, a lot of time and effort working with both policymakers, but also with the private sector. And this has been historically the sweet spot. If you come with a very small village electrification project, no matter how interesting it may look, we just don't have the capacity or the incentives to go out and do a tiny little financing with all our transaction costs, with all our overheads. Maybe even our expertise may not be most suited to sort of target or tackle those projects. So the way we see it is that, okay, if we cannot go directly into every single project, how can we at least use our financial muscle to catalyze as much capital and multiply, the level of investments in the continent as possible, so that our sort of, modest contributions in the big picture or the big scheme will really sort of translate into millions or eventually even billions on the ground. So I would say that on the public sector side, for example, we've started redirecting some of our public sector, public funding or sovereign funding away from some of these larger projects and into sort of a more targeted national level energy access programs. And several of them in partnership are delivered in partnership with the private sector. I think this is speaking to the paradigm shift that our colleague from Kenya was mentioning. And one good example is, for example, the $150 million loan to the Nigeria electrification program, which is a nationwide program with various other multilaterals, which has a focus on productive use technologies and demand-side stimulation. Again, we heard about that, about electrification of social infrastructure like schools and health centers, and also some element of subsidy to the private sector to close the viability gap. So that's on the public sector side, where we work in programs that can then sort of through the government reach out to various small projects across the country. But then on the private sector side, our strategy has been to create dedicated pools of capital with expert teams to really go out there and do the business. So we've been working on structuring and anchoring various investment funds, and I'll tell you about a few in a second. But again, the rationale here is rather than taking, say, 10 million and putting it into one project, we can take 10 million, create a pool of capital, call our sort of partners and investors. That 10 million with these other contributions becomes 100 million, for example. We have a team to manage that, and that team will then deliver projects with other investors at the project level, and you go from the 100 million to, say, the 500 million in invested capital at the end of the day, right? So this is the catalytic effect and the multiplier effect that we want to promote, not just us going in on a project-by-project basis, but creating various pools of capital and teams to go out and mobilize more funding and deliver more funding to the projects. I think some of the notable examples I'd like to highlight. One is the Facility for Energy Inclusion. This is a debt financing platform entirely dedicated to decentralized energy businesses, solar home systems, mini grids, captive solar solutions. Then we have recently, where we sort of also brought to market the Spark Plus Clean Cooking Fund. This is a dedicated equity fund to invest in emerging clean cooking ventures, so small businesses or emerging businesses in the clean cooking space, and help them grow and expand their businesses, their operations, their sustainability to really become, the future businesses that we as AFDB would like to invest. We're now working on the Africa Go Green Fund, which is focusing more on the appliances side, on the energy efficiency side, including looking at green mobility, electric motorcycles, which also play as nice complements to, say, mini grid business models, for example, in rural areas. And we have many other initiatives that can speak to this sort of strategy of bringing in as much capital and creating as much capacity as possible to deliver that capital to the projects on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean. In renewable energy, it's obvious we need huge capital to be able to transform millions and be able to cover the gap in energy poverty. And that's a very good talk that you briefly made. Now, for you, Paul, I mean, we all know that Africa is made up of 54 countries, and the 54 countries are very small, big, they don't talk to each other sometimes. And when we talk about big energy projects, we are talking about losses in biodiversity and many environmental challenges. So what can we do differently, Paul, so that we can be able to, for example, share power, so that when we have one country, energy in one country can be used by the other country, for example? Or how can we move renewable energy products between the borders without double taxation and so many issues? Paul, what do we really need to do differently as a government?
Thank you, Thomas, for that question. And indeed, it is true that Africa actually can benefit, excuse me, can benefit from power trading. One of the critical things that is important is to emphasize the energy corridors. The energy corridors is a concept which has been discussed, and it is talking about the integration of power pools, so that the East African power pool can be connected to the southern power pool, can be connected to the central and western. In that sense, what it means is countries can be able to share power, and power can be moved from where it is least cost so that it can be available to others. A good example is within East Africa. We have already developed some interconnections. For example, Kenya is interconnected with Tanzania. A line has been done. We've also completed an interconnection with Ethiopia. And these lines are helping us to be able to get power across the borders. That itself accelerates trade. It also facilitates cheaper power to be available to Africans. As I earlier said, the business case for energy, and for renewable energy for that matter, is already being established. It is something that can be profitable if private sector can get to understand how to get to do it. So in that respect, then, I feel that the power corridors and the interconnections where we can tap from, for example, Ethiopia has a lot of hydro, DRC has a lot of hydro. If these could be linked up together, then countries do not need to invest in very expensive thermal systems. They can actually use that. And of course, the international laws that allows countries to do those tradings. The other aspect is the customs union. Within East Africa, we have developed some customs union where the issue of taxation has been harmonized, so that across the borders, products and services can be found without necessarily consumers paying more across the border. And this is the way to go, so that we can make energy services available to the areas where it is having comparative advantage. So in that sense, I think then there is a lot of opportunity for private sector to take advantage of such realities. And we have seen also that for a long time, for example, Uganda and Kenya have been interconnected. When there is surplus power in Kenya and Uganda has a deficit, the power flows to Uganda and the vice versa. So which then means if we do that, we are able to improve on energy security, we are able to address all these other factors that will make it possible for energy to be available in a more sustainable and affordable manner. So in that sense, yes, it is possible. Irina has done a lot of work on the clean energy corridors. And this is one of the strategies that we feel if we can adopt, we can be able to accelerate and scale the exploitation and harnessing of the huge renewable energy resource potential that is within the African region. And so that in a nutshell says it is possible. We need just to get the right business models. In fact, the business models are the ones that you drive the investments. So where you are able to get, for example, to support the small and medium enterprises to begin investing in small way, and if we can be able to stimulate some innovative financing, then that can help them start up and be able to scale. So for me, it is possible and it can be done, and we need to focus on it so that the dream for universal access can be a reality. Let me pause it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. We know that business models, the private sector make very good business model. I mean, there's a private sector in Africa which works very hard. We've heard about finance opportunities from C4All, Rushi, and with Jean was also talked very positively about finances and all those things that can really make very big changes in the African continent. But Habiba, you being on the private sector, I know that you have specific challenges and probably a lot of challenges. What do you think can be done differently by the governments? What do you think can be done differently by the financial institutions or probably the civil society so that we can create the change that we need for you as...
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
What do you think we can do differently for you as a private sector?
Well,
we can get the change we need.
Yeah, I think that already the governments are doing a lot, and it's quite appreciated. I mean, I've been in this space for about 15 years now. And I mean, if you ask me, the last 5 years have been very interesting because there's so much that's now happening and there's so much speed and there's so much activity. It's very nice to see, you know. I mean, I remember when we started in maybe if you asked me this same question, say 13 years ago, I'll talk about better policies. I'll talk about a lot more support, tax waivers, and all of that. I mean, when we worked on the Practitioners Dialogue for Climate Investments in 2016, there was still all this talk about improved policies and across the nations and everything. But currently, I will give it to the governments from all levels. I mean, SC4All is here, the African Development Bank is here, but there's still a little more that needs to be done. And this is going to be not just from the global bodies and, you know, the over multilateral bodies, I'll call them, but also from the governments in the countries themselves. You know, there's still a need to harmonize a lot and also to create very good policies that encourage a healthy energy mix. You know, there's a need to ensure that what is available as resources and what is required as for energy solutions are very closely related. So for example, in Nigeria, there are some parts of the country where geothermal opportunities are really, really rife and nobody is tapping into it. Nobody is doing anything about that, you know, but there's somewhere called the Ikogosi warm springs, and the geothermal possibilities there. I was talking with the owner, with the manager one time. It's so huge and immense, and this for me is what will make me go back to my talk about distributed renewables. So how do you build a model around this kind of resources that are close to where it is needed, so you don't have to transport it for too long? What you need is where it is, and you know, and can be used. I mean, the communities in and around that region are like 90% not having energy as much as they would require. And that alone is enough to give the whole state energy that they require. So there's need for the government in the national level and the state level or region level, I don't know, across West Africa, I know there are different levels, they're not the same. So there's a need to find a way to work together, harmonize their own policies, harmonize their decisions, harmonize their actions, so that it's giving birth to solutions that are actually needed and require little or no, little or very minimal additions from the private sector to carry it forward. Because a lot of times it's not that the private sector does not know what to do, does not want to do the business, does not have the access to investment or access to support that is needed. It's also the policies that are in place that are either limiting that activity happening. For example, the EcoGosi, when I was talking about it, the state government had put on some sort of restriction that somebody else could not do something. So there's always one thing that the government kind of needs to remove as a barrier to ensure that these works are being done as and should actually travel further in ensuring that renewable energies do well for the people. Like I said, a healthy energy mix is also very important. And currently, I'm very happy in Nigeria. One of the things that they're really pushing forward is, say, for example, the liquefied petroleum gas adoption across communities. And one of the biggest problems that we have is cooking energy. And we are also one of the countries who lose a lot of woodland every year due to cooking. And it's about almost 402,000 hectares of woodland is being lost every year to deforestation. And we have LPG is available. We can use this. So if there's a way the government can actually develop policies, and I'm very happy that there's an office for the vice president on LPG now that's trying to do a lot of work in support from Nigerian Energy Support Program through the REA to ensure that the LPG is deployed evenly across the country. So there's, like I said, there's work that has started, but it needs to actually be seen through to completion and seen through to positive results. So there's need for continued reductions and continued sustained actions and activities that will ensure private sector does not fall back and lose faith in the whole process. I'm very happy recently the World Bank funding for Nigerian electrification project has actually had the subsidy increase. So that means somebody is paying attention. Somebody is monitoring to ensure that the activity is traveling, is going the way it's supposed to be going, and it's not being, it's not falling back and being one of the lost causes that we're used to generally. So if all of these is in place, private sector can actually grow. Private sector can develop models that will ensure energy access is global and easily accessible to each and everyone that is in whatever country or whatever region or whatever community.
Thank you so much, Habiba. I think due to the time constraint that we have, I will go to my next question. Of course, we've been talking about finance, everybody, and we have two financiers as speakers here. We have Ruchi and we have Duarte. Jean, I'll give each one of you quickly 2 minutes to talk about the opportunities that the audience can have with C4All and with Afdb Bank. Thank you, and then we will quickly give you more time to answer a few questions from the audience. Thank you. Ruchi, 2 minutes.
Thank you again, Thomas. And
you are muted.
I'll try to keep it under a minute. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Just continue.
Okay, perfect. So I guess just to emphasize the point all speakers are making, that the clock is really ticking for this high impact action from all of us. So our work shows a couple of things, but in the interest of time, I'll steer your focus on a few things. I'm going to quote Paul here to say that all interventions need to put people at the center of any intervention in the sector. So in terms of partnering with SC4All, I would say if there are particular projects, ideas where you think, this sort of puts people at the heart of that intervention, please write to us. We would love to sort of engage and see how we can take that further. I'm also going to stress the fact that we've seen the importance of proper targeting of any financial and technical assistance. And I will note that there's a current lack of evidence on the energy consumption levels with these households. So, which in turn make life harder for people like Paul and the policymakers from determining that appropriate threshold for this intervention. So again, if there are projects, people have in mind, have ideas around, we'd love to sort of partner around this. Secondly, sort of pitching on behalf of our overall work around policy reform and adoption of sustainable business models. Again, we see that as key to accelerated deployment of finance. I think Habiba made a great pitch around, how we need the public sector to really come in and support such interventions. So again, if there are public sector participants, public sector actors who would love to engage with us, we're all there to, sort of forward our hand to partner on this front as well. Finally, our experience around has shown that we see results-based financing as one of those mechanisms that can spur the energy access space. So I'm not going to go into a pitch around that, but we are seeing through our project that this is delivering money with the speed and the scale that we want to see in the sector. So this is almost like an open call for all mini grid developers at this point, but going forward, we sort of hope to expand our current facility to many other technologies to be able to sort of leverage what we have. And again, this opportunity does place the risk on the private sector initially, but it also provides in turn this greater certainty in terms of what is available to them in terms of the financing. So this is again why we've set up the Universal Energy Facility and in partnership with several stakeholders. So very much welcome the support of the private sector who is interested to sort of partner with us and take this forward. I'll pause here and I ran through my minute, but handing over to Joe.
Thank you so much, Ruchi. Jean, 2 minutes, please, or 1 minute if possible. What opportunities do we or the audience have to partner with Afdb Bank?
Well, there are several, and the same way we have various facilities, we have various programs, we have various instruments, concessional finance, commercial finance, technical assistance, project preparation. So we've got all of that under our roof. And you can find out more about that in our website, and certainly reach out to me or to one of my colleagues if you want to learn more about it. My 2 points would be about how we see the financing being mobilized and unlocked at scale. And again, we've talked about policies, we've talked about programs. And what we need to do when we design these policies and these programs is that we do that in close consultation with the private sector. Because there's been many countries that have done this in a vacuum, and in the way they said, yes, we've got an enabling framework, but then the private sector is not coming, right? So without that, there's no projects. Without projects, there's no financing, and so on and so forth. And then my second point goes to the issue of local currency financing. Energy access businesses, they're collecting payments in local currency, whether it's Naira in Nigeria or Kenyan shilling. And a lot of the financiers are availing euros and dollars, right? Which is not really what they need. They need local currency financing. And our focus is first and foremost to unlock more local currency financing, to involve the local commercial banks. That's our vision, that, that energy businesses are seen as mature, they're seen as bankable, and any developer, any sponsor can walk up to a local commercial bank and get a loan on good terms in their currency of origin. And I think once we solve these two, I would say, big issues, then I think all our other instruments, all the other investors, I think you'll see them sort of piling up to finance the sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. Now we are ready to take any questions from the audience or any line audience. Is there anybody with a question physically before we go to the virtual audiences?
We have 2 questions from the virtual audience. Question number 1 is, financial incentives and drivers are necessary to encourage participation, but domestic policies also need to have tangible effects on investor confidence. How do financiers and policy makers work together to achieve this? Should I bring the second question as well?
if they are related, you can, if it is finance, Rushi or Jean, feel free to answer that. Maybe you repeat it again, James.
Yes, so the first question says that financial incentives and drivers are necessary to encourage participation, but domestic policies also need to have tangible effects on investor confidence. How do financiers and policymakers work together to achieve this?
I will direct that to Rushi. Somebody is asking how you work together with the policymakers so that your finances can be able to reach the ground.
Thank you, Thomas. And I guess, completely agreed that, this moves in tandem. And I think both Zhao and Habiba have made that point around this as well. I think our approach to this would be to work very closely with the policymakers to make sure that there is this enabling framework that allows for this investor confidence in the first place. And again, all these instruments, including the one that I mentioned, really sort of hinge on a very suitable, conducive public sector, public framework and conducive policies in the sector, whether it's the mini-grid space or decentralized energy space. So completely seeing them go hand in hand. And again, our approach is to bring all the right stakeholders on the table for any such intervention.
Thank you. James, the next question.
Yes, there's one more question from the audience, again from the virtual audience, again finance related. Looks like finance is a hot topic. So the question says that there has been many discussions on financing. Africa has the lowest access to finance for so many reasons, from assessing how ready the projects are, sovereignty guarantees, risks, and so on. What will change after COP26 to make it easier to access funds for softer costs such as research?
Zhao, would you please be able to explain what will change in Africa after COP26? They want to know if they will be able to access money. You are the big brother in the house. Money?
I am the big brother. I don't have all the answers to all the questions. I think there's two parts to this question. I think one is on access to finance, and it is true that Africa is seeing the lowest flows of finance for renewable energy. And I think one of the biggest problems, or two of the biggest problems, one is having a strong supply of bankable projects, because when you have a good project, financiers pile up to be part of the action. That you can be assured. The problem is that there's not so many good projects to invest, and we need to really nudge more projects in the right direction. I think the other point about the poor or the limited flows of finance is again around the enabling environment. If there are various risks within the country, investors are not going to come about. And then financiers will not chase those projects either, right? So again, we need to work harder on the enabling environment front. What will change? I would like to see a stronger commitment to renewable energy, to putting coal and fossil fuels behind us. I think that's one, and I think we're seeing that already coming through. And in terms of funding for research, again, I don't have so much interface with the research and development community, with the universities, but I can assure you that there are a lot of project developers out there and a lot of institutions that are pumping funding for a very innovative, business models, for new configurations of technologies, for linking actually various sectors like, agriculture with energy, with water, with mobile telephony. So there is private capital actually, and some philanthropic capital actually going for, researching and delivering some of the cutting edge, technologies and projects of the future. So maybe I didn't answer your question, but I shared some further insights and lights on the topic.
Thank you, Zhao. I think we have time for one last question. A very brief question and quick answer, and then Alice will close the session because our time is almost up.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you all colleagues for the good discussions. Mine is only two short points and one question. And I think coming out from, my name is Simon Peter Weredwom, Conservation Manager, WWF Uganda. And I think the views coming here is that all of us actors, we need to begin to see energy in a new transformational development approach and have it in the development agenda, because energy powers almost everything, but not at all times it is seen as so by the different stakeholders. That is point number one. Point number two, I think my colleague from the Kenyan government has really dealt with my worries, and we, as practitioners, we are happy that now we have doors to knock at, especially on issues of barriers to regional integration on matters of energy and sustainable energy. So we are happy with that. My question goes to, I think, colleagues from Afdb. You normally target big projects and governments. So what initiatives are there to ensure that you reach small-scale business operators? And two, what safeguards do you have in place to ensure that your interventions don't impact negatively on the environment and the people? Thank you very much.
Jean, I'll give you exactly 30 seconds or 40 seconds to answer that, and then Alice, just go ahead to give us a final closure, because our time is now up. We are past the hour.
Right, very quickly, we help countries and governments design programs for small-scale energy access where our concessional funding can flow into the most remote areas with the appropriate solutions. Two, we also support the setup of commercial financing platforms that will also target financing for, businesses that are keen to go and electrify, the smaller communities, and that have the ingenuity to actually pool projects, aggregate projects, and make sure that various tiny projects actually add up to a larger project, and that could be financed. Third, on safeguards, we have a very high standards in terms of integrated safeguards of social and environmental. I'm not gonna sort of go into detail, but these are non-negotiable, right? The appropriate consultation of communities, appropriate mitigation and compensation for any impacts, be them social, be environmental, all it's there, and it's very comprehensive. I would encourage you to look up the Integrated Safeguard System, ISS, on the African Development Bank website, and you can see for yourself, the breadth of policies and regulations we have in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jean. Alice, for the final closing words.
Thank you so much. It's a pity we are out of time because this was an excellent discussion. And thank you so much to all the speakers. Let's see, what did I pick out? Put people at the center. I thought that was a very important message from Paul. We need to put people at the center. We need to understand the context. We need the least cost, best fit. I heard a lot about de-risking through enabling policy frameworks, really lots of good examples around integrated energy planning, regulatory indicators for sustainable energy. 3 was finance. Lots of finance needed to mobilize more private capital, but also some good opportunities out there that can be explored. And I think really the last one out, and also the last one maybe I'll talk about is really taking the energy where it's needed most in the rural areas. That came through very, very much, where it really is needed most. And I think that a lot of the opportunities, around power trading and energy corridors, they give us hope that if we can invest more and if we can bring more finance, there's an opportunity to really take care of these, of improving our energy access, because the opportunities are there and the business case has been made. And so really, thank you so much. The main message, I guess, was that we need to call for more investments in renewable energy and stop the funding of coal. Over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That brings to the end of our side session. Thanking all the audience. Thank you very much.